Yes, guys, what is up? Welcome back for yet another episode of the Off Grid podcast. Pleasure to see you again through the audio transmitting waves. Now, guys, this week's guest is Adam Burns. Adam is the founder of FANION Studio, which do sports advertising, but he's also done a load of adventures to back that up. Adam's walked from Argentina to Brazil across 1,966 kilometres with three mates of his and a golf trolley. He has also cycled from Sydney to Melbourne dressed as a jockey for the Melbourne Cup. And during the 2018 Football World Cup, he watched one game with a fan of every nation, all in London. In this conversation, we talk about accidentally kidnapping a Uruguayan dog, how ordinary people can do extreme adventures, arriving in Argentina on the anniversary of the Falklands War wearing England football tops, the misconceptions people have about travelling, and how to get mainstream media to care about your adventure. Hope you guys absolutely love this episode. Adam is a great example that anyone can achieve incredible things in adventure. On with the podcast. Adam, welcome to the Off Grid podcast.
Great to meet you. Great to I've listened to the back catalogue, so yeah, it's great to catch up.
Yeah, we got a fan on. This is awesome. It's always nice to speak to someone who's like already interested in the podcast. And when I was looking into what you've done with your world and your life, the one thing that really interests me is I usually sit here with professional adventurers who like spend most of their waking moments thinking about adventure or the big expedition that they're about to go on. But with you, you're not a professional adventurer, and it's really not about the big summit for you or anything like that. It's kind of far more holistic or cultural. How would you describe your adventures?
Well, they've changed over the last few years. I think now adventure for me is all about getting the kids out there. I've got two 5-year-old twin boys, so we bought a camper van. We go fishing. We do a lot of that. But I think the big adventure that kind of changed the way I looked at the world, I think, was when I walked to the World Cup in 2014 in Brazil. And I think it probably was quite out of the blue, but I feel if I could trace back, I was working in kind of PR and advertising, living in Leeds. I went to uni in Leeds and stayed there for a few years after. And I actually did the PR for a guy who ran 66 ultra marathons in the 66 cities in the UK, Andy McMenemy. And we did his whole PR campaign, and it really exposed me to someone doing something amazing like that. And I was just following his journey, and he was going every city, every day he was going to a different city. He pulled his Achilles at one point. He finished in York on the racetrack, and it was just an amazing story to be part of. And then I moved to Australia, and I also followed a guy called Jamie McDonald, who ran from one side of America to the other for the sick kids, and he dressed as Superman. And I knew Rich Lee, the guy who did his PR, and followed that journey. And I think what struck me with his journey was because he kind of documented his more on social, and this was 2011 probably. I just loved that he'd get to a new town and he'd meet people and just have these random interactions, and people would put him up for the night for free. And he just had this Jamie himself had this really kind of magnetic personality. So it said like every day he was kind of going on this random run, and he'd probably run a marathon a day, get to a new town, and then just have this really lovely connection with a new family, and slowly but surely his journey kind of captured the media's attention, and people were kind of greeting him as he got to. It was a bit like I suppose Forrest Gump is the first thing everyone thinks about that, but he. So yeah, that I think those two experiences or following those journeys kind of probably lodged themselves in my head, and then the World Cup was taking place in Brazil, and I'm a massive football fan, and I really wanted to go. I'd moved over to live in Sydney, Australia, to live with two friends who, for me, have kind of adventure in their bones. They grew up. Dave grew up in Windermere, working on the lakes. Pete grew up in Teesside, but like North Yorkshire, lovely, beautiful rolling hills. And we had a Nissan Pajero, and we used to go fishing after work every Friday. And I grew up, did a bit of fishing growing up, but these boys were like, they were proper kind of, woodsmen, like adventurers. They would catch a fish, and they could build a fire, and I really learned a lot from them. And they really inspired that kind of adventurous streak in me. So one night in 2013, me and Dave were at our favorite little pub called the Little Guy on Glebe Point Road in Sydney. Amazing little bar. And we got talking about going to the World Cup. And that night, after probably 3 or 4 beers, we bought the URL to www.walktotheworldcup.com. And I think it probably cost us about $100 or something. But it was, for us, it was quite a lot of money at the time. And I think because we did that the next morning when we woke up, it's like we bought a URL. It felt real. And I think anyone thinking about doing something, put a little bit of skin in the game, and it'll probably make you do it. I think we were a year out for the World Cup, so we spent a year planning. But I think had we not bought that URL that night, it probably would have been one of our whimsical ideas that never got off the ground.
Okay. So there's commitment there. And obviously you've centered a lot of your different adventures around sport. Why is that a key theme between the different things you've done?
I think there's a real special energy that a major tournament or a major sporting event brings to a city or a country. My first experience of a major tournament was probably Euro 96. And I remember the way that captured my town. I grew up in Newmarket, the home of horse racing. I remember it just capturing that idea of World Cup fever or Euros fever. I think it kind of binds people together. So obviously we wanted to go, and we are big football fans, but I think walking to something so we started in Mendoza, Argentina. We crossed the border. We crossed over to Uruguay from Buenos Aires to Colonial Sacramento, and then walked the entire coast of Uruguay, and then entered Brazil at Choi, and finished on the World Cup pitch at Porto Alegre. So we're going through 3 countries where football is like a religion. Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. So everywhere we went, we were treated like, first with a bit of skepticism. I mean, we were three guys walking with golf carts. We had golf carts, pushing golf carts with our bags attached, rocking up to these tiny little pueblos. And in the early days, people didn't know what we were there for. I mean, we did get kind of semi-arrested at one point, taken to a police station to kind of check what we were doing. But more as the journey went on, we'd be put up for free. People would want to be really hospitable to us, feed us, make sure we all had enough water for the next day. And I think football becomes that kind of breaks down the barrier. They're all football fans. We've got our England shirts on, or sometimes we'd wear Argentina shirts or Uruguay shirts. I think it just gives you an icebreaker when you get to a place and you don't speak the language. Dave and Pete speak pretty good Spanish, but my way of communicating with the locals was kicking a ball with them. So I suppose that's the reason why I've always tried to do things around major sporting events.
We've all got jobs, and one thing when I was looking into what you do is that you're living your life, and we all know that annual leave is precious time. So what is it about you that makes you want to go and do these adventures?
I think in the early days, so when I did walk to the World Cup, I was 27. And it was about doing something that I'll remember for the rest of my life with, you know, three of my best friends, and a stray dog that we accidentally kidnapped in Uruguay. Stayed with us for 6 weeks. But you know, we now don't see each other all the time. The three lads that I walked with, but when we do, we're kind of bound by this one experience that gives us, you know, instant stories that we can talk about, for the rest of our lives. I think the other thing was, I, you know, I travelled a bit, but I hadn't done, this type of travel. I think there's a real difference between, you know, going on holiday and there's walking through parts of Argentina and Uruguay that most tourists don't go. There's a real slowness to it, a real, you just feel a lot more of the country. You get an understanding. You go into these tiny little villages and meet real locals that don't live in the big cities. There's a real difference to traveling that way. And I think the other thing was I was really trying to focus my career on sport. So part of it was, I suppose, doing something for real gives you something really credible to talk to whether you're talking to brands or an employer or, you know, when you tell someone you walk to the World Cup and you're pitching on a World Cup campaign or a, you know, a new sports ad, it gives you something real to talk about.
Yeah, it's hard to beat that. It's like the real deal.
Yeah. But that's it. I think the other thing is we were massive football nuts, and none of us had ever been to a major tournament game. And the FA were kind enough to invite us to the England games. Unfortunately, England got knocked out literally after the second game. The third game was a dead rubber. I actually gave my ticket to a local, a Brazilian guy, who lived in Belo Horizonte, where the game was. He went to watch England draw 0-0 against Costa Rica, but for him it was incredible just to go to the games. But obviously, the World Cup on the horizon is going to be very different. What's going on in Mexico is very worrying. Whether that will go ahead in Mexico, I don't know, but I think I will be going out for some element of it. But as my life has changed and I'm now a father of two and married, the idea of walking to anywhere in America is off the table. But I do. The next three tournaments are in really interesting countries, and I would like to do something with my two sons at some point, maybe 2030 or 2032. So let's
I
see.
had a look at the sheer scale of going from Argentina, Mendoza to Porto Alegre in Brazil,
Mm,
just to look on Google Maps how far it would take, and it came up with 424-hour walk, and it was just
mm,
covering like all the way from west to the east on like that southern tip of South America. And that really let me know just like what an undertaking it was. And obviously it's done with good humor, right? Like you've got these four guys with their golf trolleys and they're like sludging through mud and everything, making it for the World Cup. But obviously there are like uh, dangers that you faced out there. There's like a serious side to what you were doing, and just like the feat of endurance in itself is pretty hard going.
mm.
What sort of dangers did you face out there?
Um, yeah, I mean, the unknown was always a fear. You never knew what you were walking into. We got charged by bulls in the San Luis Desert in Argentina. Me and Dave got electrocuted by a fence that we didn't realize was electric. We, I think, yeah, most of it was kind of, I mean, the weather was really bad in Argentina at times, like torrential rain, which made, you know, progress quite slow. Um, the San Luis kind of desert was probably the hardest part because it was just so hot, so dry, and pushing a golf cart that we got from, you know, their version of decathlon, like not the best wheels. You know, was hard going. Um, I mean, people have tried to walk to the World Cup before, and tragically, actually, an American guy was hit by a car on his way to the Brazil World Cup, Richard Swanson in Oregon. So we kind of had that in the back of our minds, since then, Santiago Sanchez, a Real Madrid fan, walked to the Qatar World Cup, but got arrested in Iran and imprisoned for almost a year. So there are, there's dangers that of doing this kind of thing, and I think our parents were all quite worried about us. And I think Dave and Pete, with their background, their planning was, the logistical planning around the journey was really tight. They actually flew out 3 weeks before me and kind of were on the ground in Mendoza planning that part of the trip. But we never had any danger from people. The people were just always so kind to us, and people put us up for free. They fed us. The welcome we always got was. I think the worst thing that happened to us was in Uruguay. Some kids nicked our World Cup football, but we were fine with that. But no, I think what we weren't were seasoned adventurers. We weren't endurance athletes, and we did. Dave had sciatica. He had a really bad back. But we were walking. Probably 40 kilometers, 50 kilometers a day. But we built in enough time to enjoy the times when we want to. So I remember one little town in San Luis in Argentina. We got to a little place called Baldi, tiny little town. I think the population was like 400, but they had this amazing football team run by a guy who actually was the first person to see us walking in. We planned to stay there a day. We ended up staying 3 days, watched one of the football matches. The guy gave us his mum had a free house that they gave us for free, and we stayed there for 3 days. We were supposed to stay there for 1 day, but we built in enough time where it wasn't like, I listened to your podcast with Mark Beaumont. We weren't endurance athletes. We were four football fans are kind of on a footballing pilgrimage, and I think that's why it kind of captured the imagination of the media a little bit. We did accidentally, kidnap a dog who walked with us for 6 weeks, and that sent the story viral, and allowed us to raise a lot of money for the charity that we were raising money for. But no, in terms of dangers, I think one element when I watched the Hardest Geezer run across Africa. I mean, that's a proper feat. We watched the World Cup, but that I can say it because I've got a ginger beard. But as a guy with pretty fair skin, to run across Africa, I mean, I think you're glued to his content and his story because the feat just feels undoable. And also, he was, I think his content, he was very engaging screen presence, and so yeah. But he came across a lot more dangers than we did. But
I was going to say, loads of people who haven't been traveling, I think they have huge misconceptions as to the dangers and thinking that people, particularly in these more rural areas like you're exploring, that they're going to be ending up in some sort of trouble. And this was your first big adventure, first time to South America, and it sounds like you're maybe feeling safe because your two friends are slightly more adventurous, slightly more experienced, so you kind of feel safe in their company. But what were you thinking when you were going out there? Because this is obviously like a huge change for you. And what were some of those misconceptions that didn't prove true?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely couldn't have done it alone. I wouldn't have had the bottle to do it on my own. We met people who'd cycled to the World Cup, or cycling every stadium on their own. I think for me, I found that element of travel quite lonely. But I think I learned a lot about myself in terms of kind of resilience. We had to camp in some pretty like horrible places in terms of either torrential rain or the desert was just so dry and prickly, and I definitely didn't think I was probably as resilient as I was, and I think I probably thought I would be a bit more scared of the kind of unknown about how we're going to be received. I mean, once we walked into a small Argentinian town on the anniversary of the Falklands or the Malvinas, and we had our England kits on. And I mean, looking back now, obviously the war against Argentina and England, but we were the guy who first saw us basically kind of told us, and we covered our England shirts up, and they invited us in for dinner, and I think we were just constantly kind of bowled over by the generosity of people. Obviously, we were, four blokes. We had a kind of strength in numbers. I think I obviously traveling alone is probably a lot more daunting, and I've got a lot of respect for people who do these amazing expeditions kind of on their own. I think I would get really lonely, so I definitely felt, and I think having Dave and Pete, who seasoned adventurers, gave me a lot more confidence.
So what was the reaction when you turned up to this Argentinian town in England tops?
I mean, it wasn't hostile, but it was kind of, we didn't obviously realize the significance of the day, and we were usually walking in either England shirts or sometimes Argentinian shirts, or usually football shirts. But I remember the guy just saying, you can come in for dinner, but maybe, because there was a big celebration happening with an Argentinian family, but it was fine in the end. But one of those you look back on, and go, could have been different, as they not been so kind of kind and forgiving, I suppose. But it was completely accidental on our part.
And you accidentally stole a dog, which you've mentioned. What's the story behind that?
So we were coming out of Montevideo in the south of Uruguay, and we went through a little town called Solis, and we'd had dogs follow us for a few hours, what you think are stray or maybe just aren't tied up, but they'd maybe follow us for a few hours, and we'd never feed them because, you wouldn't want to take them away from wherever they live. This one absolutely stunk, and I think he'd been rolling in. There was a lot of capybara on the side of the road that had been hit by cars, and he had this weird affliction to rolling in roadkill, essentially, that we later learned. So that's probably why he smelt. But he followed us for the whole day, and it must have been like a 9-hour walk, and we just couldn't shoo him away. He was a black Labrador or kind of lab mix. The next morning, woke up thinking he'd be gone, and he was asleep in my tent, in the front porch of my tent. I was like, oh God, that dog's still here. And then we set off, and we had to cross like a highway, which was like 3 lanes one way, 3 lanes the other. Obviously, we've got our golf carts, and now we've got a dog. So we were kind of worried that he might get hit by a car here. Anyway, we couldn't shoo him, so Dave picked him up. I think Pete stopped the traffic, and me and Ben tried to get all of the golf carts over. And then from that moment on, we were kind of like, this dog is probably going to come with us. So and then in the end, he had an England shirt on, and he stayed with us for 6 weeks. He must have walked something like 800 kilometers, I think. He crossed the border in Choi. We thought the border patrol would like stop him, but it was quite lax. It was just like we went in and showed our passports and then kind of just walked on. Anyway, we get 3 days before we're finishing the walk on the World Cup pitch in Porto Alegre. Someone gets in contact with us on our Facebook page, a guy from Solis called Nacho. It's like a 25-year-old student, looked kind of similar to me, same height, beard. And Jefferson was quite protective over me. He would always walk by my side. If I ever got up, he would kind of follow me. Anyway, this guy sent us some pictures and said, look, that's my dog. I've seen you in the newspaper in Uruguay, and that's my dog. he then hitchhiked. He got a farmer to take him to the border, and then another guy took him to Porto Alegre. And the woman who'd saw our story, was offered to put us up for free, said, "Oh yeah, I'll put Nacho up for free as well." So he stayed the night before, and then there's an amazing video of when dogs are reunited with servicemen or servicewomen who've been away for a long time, and they go
Yeah.
crazy. It was exactly like that. He Nacho just goes Negro, because he was a black Labrador and he was called Negro. And he shouts Negro, and then he just bolts from my side, and Nacho's crying. We called him Jefferson. His tail's like wagging, and it was just one of those, like, how is this? It felt like a kind of Disney, like the end of a Disney story. So he then came onto the pitch with us. We did press photos with him, and because the plan was actually for me to take the dog back to Australia, because we were kind of like, we can't just ditch the dog from and I was speaking to Emirates, who were going to help me fly him back, but in the end we didn't have to, because Nacho then took him back to his home. it was amazing.
Wow.
And I mean, he single-handedly smashed our kind of fundraising target, because people just wanted to donate to. We built some water wells, 3 water wells in the north in Bahia, with the money that we raised, but it was largely down to the Jeffersons. I mean, to walk that far was just insane.
So how far did you walk with Jefferson, and how did that kind of change the trip? So I imagine now, like, you got to feed him, water him. Did that
Yeah,
change the sort of the
it
team
definitely.
and the
Yeah,
trip?
I mean, it definitely did. He walked from Solis, which is just outside of Montevideo, to Porto Alegre. So I think it's something like, I want to say like at 800 kilometers. It might be more. But it did change the dynamic slightly. I mean, there was one time where we went to Cabo Polonio, which is this amazing little kind of place on the coast of Uruguay, where it's got a population of 128. Everyone lives in these kind of like shacks. There's no electricity, there's no running water. It's all like generators or solar power. But you can't get there by foot. You have to get driven there. But they wouldn't let Jefferson come on this kind of bus thing that they were carrying us on. So they said, "Look, put him some food. He can stay here." We were only going to stay there for one night. Anyway, we set off, and Jefferson just runs for 7 kilometers following the thing. And when he got there, the guy just said, "Okay, he can stay for the weekend," because apparently there's you're not allowed to take dogs there. So he was like so determined to stay with us. And yeah, I did change the dynamic, and but it kind of gave us I don't know, it bound us together more that we had this kind of fifth member. We did kind of think when we started planning, was like, imagine if people start walking with us, a bit like Forrest Gump. And we had people do like the odd leg, but Jefferson was in it for the long haul. I mean, it was incredible. And for him to go back to his owner, and for him to have an owner, we thought he was stray. We thought he was just a stray dog that we'd accidentally kind of dog napped.
What was that like, to realize that you'd accidentally kidnapped someone's dog?
Well, I think we'd get to a place and we'd talk about Jefferson's backstory and wonder why he was a stray, which we thought he was a stray. So to then get pictures from Nacho of him as a puppy, and Nacho had him since he was a tiny little puppy, and he was actually only 6. We thought he was a lot older than he felt like an old dog, but he was only 6. I think just to learn his backstory and see pictures of a puppy was like the perfect way to end. And the reuniting video is just a kind of cherry on the top of what was an incredible journey. And it would have been difficult for us, because we were going to have to put him into like temporary accommodation whilst we like a dog pound for a while, if I did want to, if I was planning to take him back. So in the end, it was just the perfect ending.
It's obviously just adds to the funny story of like these 4 guys with golf carts and a dog
Yeah,
heading towards the
yeah,
World Cup. It's like, I remember watching the videos and just thinking like, wow, what a sight. Just these four British guys heading out looking like a comedy. There was so much humor to the whole thing, which I loved. It was just
Yeah,
like, it's not one of these serious expeditions. It's funny.
that's it.
But was that kind of like was it meant to be funny? Was the idea to kind of keep the good humor in it?
Yeah, it was never a endurance challenge. It was always a kind of for football fans on an adventure, on a pilgrimage. We never wanted it to be too serious. I think uh, the what we did do is, we did um, try and get attention from the media by, so for instance, we were saying we were walking 1,966 kilometers, 1966, the last time England won the World Cup. We probably walked a bit further than that, but it was a nice number for media to grasp onto. And we wanted to do that because we were trying to raise money for the JW Arts Care Trust and build the water well. So we needed press attention to, hopefully get donations. Um, but Jefferson just sent it to. I mean, we were on TV in something like 50 countries, like China, Japan, Russia, all because of the dog, because it adds an element of magic to the story. I remember there was a great one around some adventure canoeists doing one, and they come across a stray dog and took him on the journey. That was about a year after, but I'd say Jefferson's, after Pickles, the dog that found the World Cup trophy, the Jules Rimet, he might be the second most famous World Cup dog in history. I think he can hold that
I
mantle.
mean, obviously, it's funny. It's good comedy. And as four guys, you're clearly having a good laugh. But were there any low points in morale throughout the massive endurance that you guys were undertaking?
Oh, I think so. I think, when you're it's about 100 days in total. I think, when you're living with four people that you're very close to, but it's a very different environment, you're going to have moments where you have disagreements, or people are tired or hungry, or um, I think also we went into it to get different things out of it. And we had different skill sets. So Dave and Pete, I think, were very much about the planning, logistics, and really having the adventure side of it. Dave is an amazing photographer and videographer, so his angle was always like capturing the content. He's now he went on to start his own production company in Manchester. He's now a lecturer at one of the universities. And I think for me, I always saw the value in trying to gain traction with media, because I knew it would build towards us getting there. And potentially the FA invited us to meet Prince Harry. We went to all the England games. So I really wanted the experience to be amazing when we got to Brazil. So sometimes that meant, spending a bit of time emailing journalists or broadcast. The other thing we tried to do before we went was try to get like brands on board, which is more common now. I think brands are coming on board with adventurers and seeing the value. But this was 13 years ago. But in the end, Airbnb saw the story and doubled everything we'd made for the charity and put us up in a lovely Airbnb in Rio for the World Cup final weekend. And funnily enough, we'd actually pitched Airbnb before we set off, but obviously we were nobodies, and until you get out there and do it, you've probably got no chance of capturing the imagination of a CMO or a brand manager.
And I think there's a lesson in that, because obviously no one listens before you set out on doing anything. And this is the same for anyone going, and like Ross Edgley, he swam around the UK, sponsors weren't interested before that. Even Russ Cook trying to like get sponsors and everything. He said like that was the biggest issue of the whole trip, was just trying to finance the thing and make it happen. So everyone has it, and I think with you and your expeditions, there's no sponsors, there's no free stuff, there's no finance for all of these trips. So how is it that you're able to make them happen? Like what's the effort that goes into making these things happen?
Yeah, I think with What's the World Cup, we spent probably a year saving to cover flights and enough to, if we needed it, to have a hotel every night, or we had camping equipment with us and we camped a lot of them, but just as a contingency. But so we'd saved probably about 8 grand each to cover flights and spending money, and but the amount of money we saved for people putting us up for free, I mean, we'd always offer to pay them and give them money, and they would just almost, they would almost get offended when you tried to give them some money to cover a night's stay or the food they gave us. But yeah, I think what ones we've done, when we did million-meter stakes, where we cycled to from Sydney to Melbourne dressed as jockeys, because I'm the son of my dad was a racehorse jockey. So we spent, that was 11-day cycle, but we got a brand on board for that to give a big donation to the RDA, Riding for the Disabled charity. So Sportsbet, which is kind of Paddy Power owned by Flutter, but that they like those kind of interesting PR. So they gave a big donation to the RDA and covered a bit of our bikes and a bit of logistics. But I think it's hard to get brands interested when you start if you're not already an established adventurer. So Russ Cook now, he's getting brand deals because he's been there and done it. And I think you have to earn your stripes a little bit and grow your audience. You can't just say, right, I'm going to do this thing. Isn't it going to be interesting? Because you have no guarantee that, one, you're going to create an interesting story, or so it's kind of, brands will be nervous if you haven't or already done it. And my work now, I work in kind of sports advertising, so I am coming up with ideas for how brands can operate in sport. So you do need to either have the audience or have earned your stripes and got proven track record of creating interesting content.
Okay. Yeah, there's so much that goes into it. And I feel like now at the moment, everyone wants to be an influencer of some kind. Like that, even in the outdoors industry, you start to see people who now want to take on big projects and build a following and all of this. But in your unique experience of like, you've done the adventure side and you've also worked on like the brand side, how would you describe someone going from like an ordinary person to being able to actually forge a career in it? Like, do you have sort of any scope on like what that journey is?
I think it's a lot easier now than, say, 13 years ago, because I feel like it's more accepted, and social media. I mean, things like kind of social challenges seem to be a thing. Like, I follow this guy, his second name's Hughes, I can't remember his first name, but he just started getting people to film him to try and do a backflip. And every day he did the same thing. A bit like Bryson DeChambeau trying to hit a golf ball over his house, that kind of idea of like repeatable content. Or the United Strand guy who, didn't cut his hair or still hasn't cut his hair. So I feel like if you can create an interesting hook, and you obviously got to invest time in it and make your content compelling. But I do think it's a lot easier now to make that jump. I feel like a lot of people, and I still am probably the same. It's taking that leap to do it right and put yourself out there to potentially fail. Walks to the World Cup, we could have failed after a week or a month, but we put ourselves out there and we got the rewards kind of, I suppose, at the end. crafted all of our career paths onto really interesting things. So I think definitely finding something that's maybe not been done before, or an interesting hook, or just going out there and trying it and trying to fail. I mean, Henry Bryden, I think he's a great example of someone who's done multiple things. He cycled from London to Sydney, and then he set up We Are Explorers. He's moved back, and he's just, gone full into setting up outside kids, with just the passion to find that niche. And I absolutely love his content. And as as a father of 5-year-old kids, it's often hard to find dad focused adventure content. It's very kind of mum focused. I find a lot of parenting material. So his stuff is fantastic. I think finding that niche is a really interesting way.
You've certainly got this interest into like the unknown and like wanting to just figure out what happens as you go and do this thing, which is really exciting. One of your more sort of social experiments on multiculturalism was the 2018 World Cup, where you watched every game with every person from each nationality in London. How did that all come about, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, so we called it Watching with the World. And it was a kind of social experiment, social challenge. I think it was a number of reasons why we did it. We didn't. I got put off going to the Russia World Cup because of the threats of hooligans beating up England fans. Actually, it was the complete opposite, and my friends that went had a great time, and I do have FOMO about that tournament. So what we decided to do was, I think often when you live in London, you can get into your own bubble and not go to some of the really interesting parts and meet some of the interesting communities that are there. I think it is one of the most multicultural cities in the world. So the challenge of trying to find a fan of every nation and watch it with them, with like whether it's on their sofa or we ended up watching Nigeria in a barbershop on Old Kent Road with 4 amazing Nigeria fans. We went to a Swedish church and watched it with probably 300 Swedes. I think, and went to the Mexican market near Colombian market, sorry, near Seven Sisters. I think I just love watching football with really authentic fans. And you can go to a pub and watch a World Cup game, and you might see a couple of fans from their nation. But I think what we wanted to do was find the epicenter of that country's diaspora or community within London, and experience it and show the world. And we kind of like photographed a portrait of each fan that we watched the game with, kind of almost like Panini stickers. And that got quite a lot of coverage. We were up at BBC on the BBC Breakfast Couch with Naga Manchetti talking about it. We hadn't found a Saudi Arabia fan or a Panama fan. And through that coverage, we got inundated with fans asking us to come and watch it. And we ended up watching it in the Panama embassy, the Panama game. It was a way of seeing parts of London that probably you wouldn't see. And again, going back to that point around what a World Cup does for a city, it puts everyone in this really positive mood, whether you're a football fan or not. Those fringe fans get really caught up in World Cup fever, and it kind of binds people together. I think that's the power of a major tournament.
It's so cool, all of your experiences, because I think there's a lot of people who are delightfully ordinary, and they work in their jobs, they're really passionate about whatever it is that they do, but very rarely does anyone actually go and live it and really experience what it is that they're talking about and what it is that they do. So for those types of people who have listened to this conversation and they're now thinking to themselves, oh, there's like been a spark lit up inside them, what would you say to those people? Where do they start?
Well, I think being passionate about whatever it is you're going to take on helps massively. The when I interview people or meet young creatives trying to get into the industry, um, are they doing it outside of just it as a job? That always excites me. If if they've got a side project that um, is related to sport, or um, I think earning your stripes and being immersing yourself in fan culture within the sport you want to work in is really important. Sport I think sport fans are the first to call bullshit when brands do things that aren't authentic to the sport, or the way fans act. So the only way you're going to really be able to advise a brand or come up with a creative idea that captures the imagination of sport fans is being one, I suppose, and being immersed in them. um, I think people I think major tournaments are a great way to do something for the first time, and it could be start small. Do something within your community, in the town or village, or city that you live in. It doesn't have to go viral instantly. It's just about trying things, and you know trying to find a way into the sport in an interesting way. um I think the World Cup this year is going to be the biggest in terms of the amount of teams, which I was actually kind of against when it was first announced, because it just felt like a money grab, and it probably is that. But I think that the likes of Cape Verde and just Scotland qualifying like in the way that they did, it does make the World Cup more democratic. And having 48 teams, although it's going to be a huge amount of games, I think it's 107 in total. It does feel like the world is there. So I would say, yeah, use big moments, or moments in the sporting calendar to try things out, create content, or create a campaign, or try to express your view of the sport in a way that could get noticed.
Adam, thanks a lot for coming on. It's been really cool to see how someone like yourself, who is a non-adventurer, go out and do something absolutely incredible. That is like a feat of endurance, and you've
Mm.
clearly got a talent of putting eyes on what you're doing and being able to spread the word. I think there's so many people, particularly young people, have like they've got a dream and they want to make it happen. If only people just knew about it. And it's like you're that kind of epitome of like, this is what you can go and do. Like it doesn't have to be serious. It can be really fun and get loads of eyes on what you're doing. So yeah, thanks for just sharing that kind of spirit of life and having a laugh with it. It's been cool to hear all your stories.
No, it's great to chat. And yeah, as I said, big fan of the pod. So looking forward to where you take it next. I think you should follow me up with a proper elite athlete just to balance it up there.
We've set the bar now. Perfect. Cheers, Adam.